Standing in the bridal suite of the Grandview Hotel, watching my twin sister Cassandra slip into my wedding dress, I never imagined this moment would destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. The dress I'd spent months selecting, the venue I'd dreamed of since childhood, the man I'd fallen in love with, all of it was about to become hers in the most twisted way imaginable. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The whole nightmare began 6 months earlier, when I landed my dream job as creative director at Morrison & Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious marketing firms. After years of grinding through entry-level positions and freelance work, I finally had the opportunity to prove myself in the big leagues. What I didn't expect was to fall head over heels for the company's enigmatic CEO, Blake Morrison. Blake wasn't your typical corporate executive. At 32, he'd inherited the family business, but transformed it from a small advertising agency into a multimedia empire. He had this way of making everyone in the room feel like they were the most important person there, but there was something vulnerable beneath his confident exterior that drew me in completely. Our relationship started professionally enough. Late nights working on campaign presentations turned into dinner meetings, which evolved into long conversations about everything from business strategy to childhood dreams. Blake had this habit of loosening his tie when he got excited about an idea, and I found myself looking forward to those moments when his polished facade would crack just enough to reveal the passionate person underneath. The first time he kissed me was during a thunderstorm in his corner office. We'd been reviewing client proposals when the power went out, leaving us alone with nothing but the city lights streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. In that moment, with rain pelting the glass and emergency lighting casting shadows across his face, Blake stepped closer and whispered that he'd been wanting to do this since the day I walked into his office. Everything moved quickly after that. Within 3 months, we were practically inseparable. Blake would send flowers to my apartment with handwritten notes tucked between the petals. He remembered that I preferred Ethiopian coffee over Italian roast, and that I collected vintage postcards from places I'd never been. When he proposed during a weekend trip to his family's lake house in Wisconsin, surrounded by autumn leaves and the scent of wood smoke, I said yes before he could finish his rehearsed speech. But there was one complication I hadn't fully considered: my identical twin sister Cassandra. I should have paid more attention to the way his eyes lingered on her during dinner, or how he seemed disappointed when she returned to Iowa the next day. Instead, I was just happy that the two most important people in my life got along so well. The wedding planning consumed the next few months. Blake insisted we hire the best vendors, no expense spared. We booked the grand ballroom at the Grandview Hotel, ordered flowers from Chicago's most exclusive florist, and chose a 7-course menu that would make food critics weep. Every detail was perfect, from the string quartet to the imported French champagne. Cass threw herself into helping with the preparations, calling me daily with suggestions and flying in multiple times to attend vendor meetings and fittings. She seemed genuinely invested in making my day special, and I was grateful to have her support during such a stressful time. "You deserve all of this," she told me, during one of our shopping trips for bridesmaid dresses. "Blake is perfect for you. You two are going to have the most beautiful life together." The night before the wedding, during the rehearsal dinner at a private room in the Palmer House Hotel, Cass gave a toast that brought everyone to tears. She talked about our childhood, about how I'd always been the responsible one who looked out for everyone else, and how it was time for someone to take care of me for a change. Blake squeezed my hand under the table, and for a moment, everything felt exactly as it should be. But something had been nagging at me for weeks. Small things that didn't quite add up. Blake had been working longer hours, coming home distracted and distant. When I asked about it, he blamed stress from a major client pitch, but I'd handled enough of those to know this felt different. He'd started keeping his phone face down during dinner and taking calls in private. Then there were the flowers. For months, Blake had been sending me my favorite white peonies. But recently, the arrangements had been red roses, beautiful, but not my style. When I mentioned it, he looked confused and said he'd told his assistant to send my usual favorites. The morning of the wedding, I woke up in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house with a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with normal wedding jitters. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Cass had stayed at a hotel downtown, claiming she wanted me to have a peaceful morning with mom and dad. I should have felt beautiful, radiant, ready to marry the man of my dreams. Instead, I felt like I was preparing for my own funeral. Cass knocked on the door 20 minutes later, carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing the biggest smile I'd ever seen on her face. "Time for a toast before the big moment," she announced. But something in her eyes looked different. Brighter somehow, like she was lit up from within by some secret excitement. "I don't think I can drink anything right now," I said, sinking into the velvet armchair by the window. "My stomach is in knots." "Come on, Em, just a sip for luck." She poured 2 glasses of Dom Perignon, the bubbles catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "This is your day. You've worked so hard for this happiness." I accepted the glass but didn't drink. Instead, I found myself studying my sister's face in the mirror's reflection. We were identical, but I'd always been able to tell us apart by subtle differences: the way she held her shoulders, the slightly more confident tilt of her chin, the mischievous glint that never quite left her eyes. Today, though, she seemed to glow with an energy I'd never seen before. "Cass, can I ask you something?" "Of course, anything. Have you been happy? I mean, really happy? With your life in Cedar Rapids, with your work?" Her smile faltered for just a moment, so briefly I almost missed it. "Why would you ask that on your wedding day?" "A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I want to make sure you're okay. Sometimes I feel guilty about how different our lives have become. You're always supporting me, celebrating my successes. But what about your dreams?" Cass set down her champagne glass and moved to stand behind me, placing her hands on my shoulders as we both looked in the mirror. For a moment, it was like looking at one person reflected twice, 2 identical women in different stages of the same life. "You know what my dream was, Em?" she said softly. "It was to be you." Before I could process what she meant, there was another knock at the door. "Ladies, we need to start lining up," called Janet, our wedding coordinator. "The ceremony begins in 15 minutes. The next few minutes passed in a blur of final touch-ups, bouquet adjustments, and last-minute instructions. The bridesmaids gathered in the hallway, a vision in dusty rose silk, while photographers captured every moment. Dad appeared in his navy suit, looking distinguished and emotional, as he offered me his arm. "You ready, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice thick with pride. I nodded, even though every instinct was screaming at me to run. As we took our positions at the back of the aisle, I caught a glimpse of the ceremony space through the partially open doors. 300 guests had filled the grand ballroom, and Blake stood at the altar looking impossibly handsome in his black tuxedo. The sight of him should have filled me with joy, but instead, I felt a strange detachment, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. The music began, Pachelbel's canon in D, just as we'd rehearsed. My bridesmaids started their slow procession down the aisle, each one radiant and graceful. Cass was the last to go before me, and as she passed, she squeezed my hand and whispered, "Thank you for everything, Emma. I love you more than you'll ever know." Something about the way she said it sounded final, like a goodbye instead of a good luck wish. Then the bridal march began, and 300 people rose to their feet. Dad squeezed my arm as we started down the aisle, but I felt like I was floating outside my own body, watching this strange dream unfold. The faces of friends and family blurred together, all smiling and crying and taking photos, but none of it felt real. Blake's eyes met mine as we approached the altar, and for a moment, his expression seemed almost confused, like he was seeing something he didn't expect. But then, he smiled that devastating smile that had made me fall in love with him, and I tried to push aside my growing sense of unease. Dad kissed my cheek and placed my hand in Blake's before taking his seat in the front row. Blake's hand was warm and familiar, but when he squeezed my fingers, something felt different. His usual gentle touch seemed more urgent, almost desperate. Reverend Patterson, who had officiated my parents' wedding 30 years earlier, began the ceremony with a warm welcome to our gathered family and friends. His voice echoed through the ballroom as he spoke about love, commitment, and the sacred bond we were about to enter. But as he continued, I found my attention drifting. In the second row, I spotted Blake's assistant, Jennifer, who was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't happiness or excitement. It was something closer to confusion, maybe even concern. Then I noticed other faces in the crowd. Blake's business partner, Richard Morrison, looked puzzled. My college roommate, Sarah, seemed to be whispering something urgent to her husband. Even Blake's mother, Eleanor, appeared to be studying me with unusual intensity. What were they all seeing that I wasn't? "We are gathered here today," Reverend Patterson continued, "to witness the union of Blake Harrison Morrison." He paused, glancing down at his notes, then looking back up at me with a slight frown. "Blake Harrison Morrison and Emma Catherine Thornton in holy matrimony." But as the words left his mouth, I saw Blake's face change. His eyes widened slightly, and his grip on my hand tightened to the point of pain. For just a moment, he looked directly at me with an expression of pure shock, as if he was seeing me for the first time. The ceremony continued, but that look haunted me through every word, every prayer, every traditional passage about love and devotion. Something was terribly fundamentally wrong, and I was standing at the altar in front of everyone I'd ever cared about, pretending everything was perfect. When it came time for the vows, Blake's hands trembled as he reached for the ring. Blake's hands were shaking as he slid the platinum wedding band onto my finger, and when he looked into my eyes to recite his vows, I saw something that made my heart stop. It wasn't love or joy or nervous excitement. It was guilt. Raw, devastating guilt, mixed with what looked like genuine terror. "Emma," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I take you to be my wife, to have, and to hold from this day forward." But as he spoke the traditional words, his eyes kept darting toward the congregation, specifically toward where Cass stood with the other bridesmaids. I followed his gaze and noticed something that sent ice through my veins. Cass wasn't looking at us with the proud, emotional expression of a sister watching her twin get married. Instead, she was staring at Blake with an intensity that was almost predatory, her lips curved in the slightest smile. When it was my turn to speak, my voice sounded hollow and distant, as if it were coming from someone else entirely. The words felt meaningless, like I was reciting lines from a play I'd never auditioned for. The platinum band felt heavy on my finger, foreign and wrong. Reverend Patterson smiled warmly as we finished our vows. "By the power vested in me by the state of Illinois, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Blake, you may kiss your bride." This was supposed to be the moment I'd dreamed of since I was a little girl. The fairy tale ending, the perfect kiss to seal our perfect love story. But as Blake leaned toward me, his face inches from mine, something happened that shattered my world completely. Instead of kissing me, he hesitated, his breath warm against my ear. And then, so quietly that only I could hear, he whispered a single word that destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. "Cassandra." The name hit me like a physical blow. My knees nearly buckled, and if Blake hadn't been holding my hands, I might have collapsed right there at the altar. 300 people were watching us, waiting for the kiss that would make us husband and wife, but all I could hear was that whispered name echoing in my head. Cassandra, not Emma, Cassandra. Blake's eyes went wide as he realized what he'd said, the color draining from his face like he'd been struck by lightning. For a moment we just stared at each other in frozen horror, the truth hanging between us like a sword about to fall. But we were trapped in this moment, surrounded by everyone we knew, with photographers capturing every second. Blake's training in corporate presentation kicked in, and he forced a smile as he kissed me, but his lips felt cold and mechanical against mine. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, rice and flower petals raining down on us as we turned to face our guests as a married couple. I don't remember walking back down the aisle. I don't remember the receiving line, or the congratulations or the posed photographs outside the ballroom. Everything after that whispered name became a blur of faces and voices and mechanical responses. I smiled when I was supposed to smile, hugged when I was supposed to hug, and laughed when someone made a joke, but inside I was dying. The only thing that kept me functioning was the desperate need to understand what had just happened. Why had Blake whispered my sister's name at the moment we became husband and wife? And why did Cass look so satisfied when I caught her eye during the photo session? The cocktail hour passed in a haze of champagne toasts and small talk. Blake stayed by my side, playing the role of the devoted new husband, but I could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a fire. Every time someone mentioned how beautiful the ceremony was, or how perfect we looked together, his smile became more strained. "We need to talk," I whispered to him during a brief moment when we were alone behind a pillar decorated with white orchids. "Emma, I don't." The word came out sharper than I intended. "Not here, but after the reception, we're going to have a conversation about what just happened." He nodded, looking like a man facing his own execution. The reception began with all the traditional fanfare. We were introduced as Mr. and Mrs. Morrison to thunderous applause, had our first dance to At Last by Etta James, and cut the three-tiered cake while photographers captured every moment. But underneath the perfect veneer, I was conducting my own investigation. I started paying attention to details I'd missed before. The way Blake's business partner Richard kept glancing between Blake and Cass with a puzzled expression. How Jennifer, Blake's assistant, seemed to be avoiding eye contact with me entirely. The strange way some of our mutual friends were looking at me, like they were trying to solve a puzzle. But it was my conversation with Blake's mother Eleanor that provided the first real clue. "Emma, darling," she said, pulling me aside during the dinner service. "You look absolutely radiant tonight, but different somehow. Did you change your hair?" "No, Mrs. Morrison. Same style as always." She studied my face with the sharp eyes that had made her a formidable businesswoman before retirement. "You seem more animated tonight. More outgoing. It's lovely to see you coming out of your shell." Coming out of my shell, I'd never been in a shell around Eleanor. We'd always gotten along well, bonding over our shared love of art history and vintage films, but the way she was looking at me suggested she was seeing something she'd never seen before. "Mrs. Morrison, when was the last time you saw me before today?" "Why, just last week, dear. You and Blake came for Sunday dinner, remember? You were quite reserved as usual. Barely said a word during the entire meal, but tonight you're positively glowing with confidence." I hadn't been to Sunday dinner with Blake's parents in over a month. We'd canceled last week because I'd been working on a crucial client presentation, but if I hadn't been there, and Eleanor thought she'd seen me, the pieces were starting to fall into place, but the picture they formed was so horrific I couldn't bring myself to believe it. I excused myself and went looking for Cass, but she was nowhere to be found. Not at the head table, not on the dance floor, not in the ladies' room. It was as if she'd simply vanished. Finally, I spotted her on the hotel's outdoor terrace, standing alone by the stone balustrade with her back to the ballroom. The summer evening was perfect. Warm air scented with jasmine from the hotel's gardens, city lights twinkling in the distance like fallen stars. Under any other circumstances, it would have been romantic. "Having fun?" I asked, stepping up beside her. Cass turned, and in the moonlight, I could see that she'd been crying. Her makeup was smudged, and her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. "Emma," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I need to tell you something." "Yes," I said quietly, "I think you do." For a long moment, she just stared out at the Chicago skyline, her hands gripping the stone railing so tightly her knuckles were white. "Do you remember when we were kids?" she finally said. "And you used to let me borrow your identity when I got in trouble. I'd pretend to be you, and you'd pretend to be me. And somehow it always worked out in your favor, because you were the good twin, the responsible one." "Cass, what are you trying to tell me?" "I've been borrowing your identity again." The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back for months. "Blake thinks he's been dating me. He thinks he proposed to me. He thinks he just married me." The world tilted sideways. I gripped the railing to keep from falling as the full magnitude of her betrayal crashed over me like a tsunami. "Hey! What are you saying?" "I'm saying that 6 months ago, when you brought me to meet Blake, something clicked. He was everything I'd ever wanted, successful, handsome, kind. But he was yours. And I was just the forgotten twin living in Iowa, planning other people's dream events instead of having my own." Her voice was getting stronger now, more defiant, as if confessing was giving her courage. "So I started coming to Chicago more often. I'd call you and find out your schedule, then show up at places where I knew Blake would be. I pretended to be you, Emma. I went to his office, met him for lunch, and spent evenings at his apartment, and he never knew the difference." "That's impossible. Blake knows me. He would have noticed, would he?" Cass turned to face me fully, and in the moonlight, I could see the pain and jealousy she'd been hiding for months. Think about it, Em. Blake fell in love with your face, your body, your voice. But how well does he really know your soul? How many deep conversations have you actually had? How many of your secrets have you shared? The horrible truth was that she was right. Our relationship had been passionate but not particularly deep. We talked about work, about surface-level dreams and preferences, but Blake had never pushed me to reveal my innermost thoughts or fears. I'd assumed that kind of intimacy would come with time. The night he proposed, Cass continued, he was proposing to me. I was the one at the lake house that weekend. I was the one who said yes. But then I panicked, because I knew I couldn't go through with a wedding as you. So I disappeared for a week, let you think Blake was just busy with work while I figured out what to do. But the wedding planning, I was involved in every detail, because I was planning my own wedding. Every vendor meeting I attended as your helpful sister, I was actually making decisions as the bride. The flowers, the menu, the music, it was all chosen by me, for me. My legs gave out, and I sank onto one of the stone benches that dotted the terrace. Everything made sense now. The red roses instead of my beloved peonies. Blake's recent distance and distraction. The way he'd looked at me with such confusion at the altar. How could you do this to me? I whispered. How could you steal my entire life? Because it should have been my life. The words exploded out of her with years of pent-up resentment. Do you have any idea what it's like being your twin, Emma? You're the smart one, the successful one, the one everyone roots for. I've spent my entire life being introduced as Cassandra, Emma's twin, like I'm just your shadow. Tears were streaming down both our faces now, but hers were angry while mine were heartbroken. I worked so hard to build something real with Blake, she continued. Over the past 6 months, he fell in love with my personality, my sense of humor, and my dreams. The only thing that was yours was the name he called me. So what was today supposed to be? Were you going to let me marry him, and then disappear? Take over my life permanently? I don't know. Cass collapsed onto the bench beside me, all her defiance crumbling. I thought maybe if I could just get through the ceremony, I could figure out how to tell him the truth afterward. Or maybe I could convince you to trade lives with me permanently. You could go back to Iowa, start over somewhere new. You're insane. Maybe I am. But Emma, you have to understand, Blake loves me, the real me. When he whispered my name at the altar, it wasn't a mistake, it was the truth finally coming out. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us crying as the weight of the situation settled around us like a shroud. Inside the ballroom, I could hear the band playing and guests laughing, completely unaware that the bride's entire world had just imploded. What happens now? I finally asked. I don't know, Cass admitted. Blake doesn't know he married the wrong twin. Legally, he's married to you because that's the name on the license. But emotionally, spiritually, he thinks he just married me. We have to tell him, do we? Emma, think about what that would do to him. He's not some villain in this story. He's an innocent man who fell in love with someone he thought was you. Finding out the truth would destroy him. And what about me? Don't I deserve to know if my husband actually loves my sister? Before Cass could answer, we heard footsteps on the terrace. Blake emerged from the ballroom, looking frantic and disheveled. Emma, both of you, thank God. People are asking where the bride went. He stopped when he saw our tear-stained faces. What's wrong? What's happening? Cass and I looked at each other, and in that moment, I saw my entire future hanging in the balance. I could expose her deception, and potentially destroy Blake in the process. I could pretend nothing had happened, and live the rest of my life knowing my husband was in love with my sister. Or I could find some third option that none of us had considered. Blake, I said, standing up slowly, there's something we need to tell you. His face went pale, and I realized he already suspected what was coming. Sit down, I said gently. This is going to be difficult to hear. As I began to explain the truth about the woman he'd fallen in love with, I watched Blake's face cycle through shock, confusion, betrayal, and finally, a kind of broken understanding. The three of us sat on that moonlit terrace until nearly dawn, untangling 6 months of deception, lies, and misplaced love. By the time the sun rose over Lake Michigan, my marriage was over, my relationship with my twin was shattered, and my life was in ruins. But for the first time in months, I finally knew the truth. The question now was what to do with it. Blake had listened to our entire confession in stunned silence, his face cycling through every emotion imaginable. When we finished, he buried his head in his hands and didn't speak for nearly 10 minutes. The distant sounds of the cleanup crew clearing away our wedding reception drifted through the morning air, chairs being stacked, linens being folded, the remnants of what should have been the happiest day of my life being efficiently erased. "I need to understand something," Blake finally said, his voice hoarse from hours of shock and tears. "Cassandra, when you were with me, when I thought you were Emma, did any of it mean anything to you, or was it all just some elaborate game?" Cass looked up from where she'd been staring at her hands, mascara streaked down her cheeks like war paint. "It meant everything to me. That's what makes this so horrible. I didn't set out to fall in love with you, Blake. I just wanted to see what it felt like to be Emma for a day. But then you looked at me the way no one ever had before, and you listened to my thoughts like they mattered, and I felt beautiful and important, and loved," Blake finished quietly. "You felt loved, yes, and I know that was wrong. I know I stole that from Emma, but I've never felt anything like that before in my entire life." Blake turned to me, his eyes red with exhaustion and pain. "Emma, I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. When I fell for who I thought was you, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. She was everything I'd been looking for without knowing I was looking for it. But it wasn't me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You never loved me at all, did you?" The question hung in the air between us like a death sentence. Blake opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, struggling with the impossible honesty the situation demanded. "I loved the person I thought you were," he said finally. "The version of Emma that Cassandra showed me. But you're right, I don't think I ever really knew the real you. We worked well together, we were compatible, we looked good together. But the connection I felt, the deep emotional bond that made me want to marry you, that was with her." The words hit me like physical blows, but I forced myself to listen because I needed to hear this truth, no matter how much it destroyed me. "What about that night in your office during the thunderstorm?" I asked. "Our first kiss, that was real, wasn't it?" Blake's expression grew even more painful. "Emma, I hate to tell you this, but that night, that was Cassandra too. She'd come to the office pretending to be you, saying she needed to discuss some campaign details. When the storm hit and the power went out, she seemed different, more confident, more playful. I thought you were finally letting your guard down with me. Every memory I'd treasured from our relationship was being systematically destroyed. The romantic dinners, the weekend getaways, the intimate conversations, how many of those had actually been with my sister? The lake house proposal," I said, though I already knew the answer. "Cassandra," Blake confirmed. "She was radiant that weekend, laughing at everything, making jokes, telling stories I'd never heard before. I remember thinking you seemed like a completely different person, but I assumed you were just happy and relaxed. When I proposed, her reaction was so genuine, so full of joy. I'd never seen her like that before." Cass spoke up from her corner of the bench, her voice small and broken. "That weekend was the happiest I'd ever been. When you got down on one knee, Blake, I forgot for a moment that I was living someone else's life. I just felt like the luckiest woman in the world. So what do we do now?" Blake asked, looking between us like we might have some solution to this impossible situation. "Legally, I'm married to Emma, but emotionally, I'm in love with Cassandra. And both of you have been betrayed in ways I can't even begin to comprehend." The truth was, none of us knew what to do. We were in uncharted territory, dealing with a level of deception and identity confusion that didn't have a roadmap for resolution. "I think," I said slowly, "I need to go away for a while. I need time to process all of this without looking at either of your faces and being reminded of what I've lost." "Emma, no," Cass said, reaching for my hand. But I pulled away. "Please don't leave like this. We can figure something out. We can fix this." "How, Cass? How do you fix 6 months of lies? How do you fix the fact that my husband is in love with my sister? How do you fix the fact that my own twin stole my entire life and didn't even feel guilty about it until she got caught?" "I did feel guilty," she protested. "Every single day was torture. Every time I kissed Blake or told him I loved him, I thought about you and what I was taking from you, but I was in too deep to stop. That's not guilt, Cassandra. That's just fear of getting caught. Blake stood up abruptly, pacing to the edge of the terrace and back. This is insane. I feel like I'm losing my mind. 6 months of my life have been a lie. The woman I proposed to doesn't legally exist. The woman I married is a stranger to me. I'm not a stranger, I said, though the words felt hollow. I'm the person you hired, the person you worked with for months before any of this started. Are you? Blake turned to face me with an expression I'd never seen before, not angry, not hurt, but genuinely confused. Because looking back now, I realize I don't know anything about the real Emma Thornton. What makes you laugh? What are your dreams beyond your career? What do you think about when you're alone at night? I opened my mouth to answer, and realized I didn't know how. We'd never had those conversations. Our relationship had been built on attraction, compatibility, and shared professional interests, but we'd never delved into the deeper aspects of who we were as people. I collect vintage postcards, I said finally, feeling ridiculous. From places I've never been. I have over 300 of them in shoeboxes under my bed. Blake stared at me. I never knew that. I love Ethiopian coffee, not Italian roast. I read poetry before bed every night. Emily Dickinson, mostly. I'm terrified of butterflies because of an incident when I was 7 that no one else remembers. I want to travel to Morocco someday and see the markets in Marrakech. With each revelation, Blake's expression grew more bewildered, as if he was meeting me for the first time. The woman I fell in love with told me she preferred Italian roast, he said quietly. She said poetry was pretentious. She wanted to honeymoon in Italy, not Morocco. That's because she was telling you what she thought you wanted to hear, I replied. Cass has always been good at becoming whoever the situation required. I wasn't trying to deceive you about my personality, Cass interjected. I was just being the version of myself that felt natural when I was with you. The confident, outgoing version that I could never be in Emma's shadow. But it was still deception, Blake said. Everything was a deception. We fell into another heavy silence, each of us grappling with the enormity of the situation. The morning sun was getting higher, and soon the hotel staff would need us to vacate the terrace. Our wedding guests would be waking up in their hotel rooms, probably expecting to see happy photos on social media from the newlyweds. We need to make some decisions, I said, forcing myself to think practically despite the emotional chaos. People are going to expect explanations, our families, our friends, the people at work. What kind of explanations? Blake asked. That depends on what we decide to do. We could get an annulment immediately, claiming it was all a mistake. We could pretend everything is fine and figure out the details privately. Or, I trailed off, not wanting to voice the third option that had been lurking in the back of my mind. Or, what? Cass asked. Or, Blake could divorce me and marry you properly. Ask yourself this time. The suggestion hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Blake's eyes widened, and Cass looked like I'd slapped her. Emma, I could never ask you to do that, Blake said. You're not asking, I'm offering. You two fell in love, regardless of the circumstances. Maybe the deception was wrong, but the feelings were real. Why should all three of us be miserable because of how it started? Because it would destroy you, Cass said, tears streaming down her face again. I've already taken so much from you. I can't take your husband too. You already did take my husband, I pointed out. The question is whether we're going to acknowledge that reality or keep pretending otherwise. Blake sat back down heavily, his head in his hands. I don't know what's right anymore. 6 hours ago I thought I was the happiest man alive. Now I don't even know who I am or what I want. That's okay, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. You don't have to decide anything right now, but Blake, you need to understand something. I won't live in a marriage where my husband is in love with someone else. I won't pretend this never happened or try to compete with my sister for your affections. I have more self-respect than that. So what are you saying? I'm saying that regardless of what happens between you and Cass, you and I are over. This marriage was a mistake based on false pretenses, and I want no part of it. The finality in my voice seemed to hit Blake like a physical blow. He looked up at me with something that might have been regret or relief. I couldn't tell which. Emma, I'm so sorry. For all of this. You deserved so much better. Yes, I did. But I also deserved the truth, and now I have it. That has to count for something. As I stood to leave, Cass grabbed my arm desperately. Emma, please. We're sisters. We're twins. This can't be how our story ends. I looked down at her. This person who shared my face, my DNA, my entire life history, but who had proven to be a stranger in the ways that mattered most. Our story ended the moment you decided to steal my identity, I said. Everything that's happened since then has just been the aftermath. I walked away from both of them, leaving my wedding dress, my marriage, and my sister behind on that terrace. As I made my way through the hotel lobby in my bare feet, still wearing the gown that had cost more than most people's cars, I felt something I hadn't expected. Freedom. For the first time in my life, I was completely, utterly alone. No twin to be compared to, no fiancé to plan a future with, no carefully constructed life to maintain. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. 3 months later, I moved to Portland, Oregon, and started my own marketing consultancy. I never spoke to Cass again, though I heard through mutual friends that she and Blake attempted to make their relationship work in the aftermath of our annulment. It didn't last. Apparently, building a relationship on deception, even when the feelings are real, creates cracks that can never be fully repaired. But that's their story to tell, not mine. My story begins with walking away from that hotel in Chicago, still wearing my wedding dress, finally ready to discover who Emma Thornton really was when she wasn't living in anyone's shadow. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.